Chapter 1. "I don't care what anyone says," Jessica Wakefield announced, tossing her blonde hair. "Dream Chaser is positively the best movie in the world." She challenged her sister Elizabeth to disagree. Jessica and Elizabeth were identical twins. Facing each other across one of the old-fashioned marble tables in Casey's ice cream parlor, the two girls looked like mirror images. They both had long blonde hair, blue-green eyes, and dimples in their left cheeks. But though the pretty sixth graders looked alike, they hardly ever agreed on anything. "I don't know," Elizabeth replied, pausing to sip her root beer float. "Tom Houston is a good actor, but the plot was completely unbelievable. Everything worked out so perfectly. It wasn't like real life at all." Jessica loved romance and glamour. She couldn't understand her twin at all. "Oh, Lizzie," she cried, "why do you always have to be so practical? That was the most exciting, wonderful movie ever made. Tom Houston is the cutest guy in the universe." She sighed in tribute to her latest heartthrob. "Honestly, Lizzie, I don't see why you bother going to the movies at all. If you want to see real life, you could save your money and watch Lois Waller eat 3 desserts at school every day." "Or Charlie Cashman shooting spitballs," Mary Robinson interrupted. Mary was a 7th grader and a good friend of both twins. With a laugh, she squeezed into the booth beside Elizabeth and signaled the waitress. She ordered 2 Casey's specials. "Leela's joining us," she explained. "She's just calling home to say she'll be late." Leela Fowler was a pretty and popular 6th grader who was Jessica's very best friend in school. A minute later, Leela strolled into Casey's, looking as perfectly groomed as a model. "Hi, you 3," she said, sitting next to Jessica. "Wasn't that movie incredible? Tom Houston was gorgeous." Jessica gave her twin a triumphant grin. "You see?" she crowed. "Now maybe you'll listen to your baby sister." The twins often joked about Jessica's being born 4 minutes after Elizabeth. "Everyone in the world except Lizzie knows Dream Chaser is a masterpiece. I just wish it had been a more realistic story, that's all. Happy endings like that don't happen to real people." "They most certainly do," Jessica insisted. "Just look at Mary. She lived in foster homes almost all her life, and just this year she found her own mother." Like everyone else in Sweet Valley, California, the Wakefield twins had been thrilled when Mary, separated from her mother as a small child, had been reunited with her. "And in case you've forgotten, Mary and her mom found each other in our very own living room," Jessica sighed again. "Just like in a fairy tale." "It was like a dream come true for me," Mary remembered, her eyes shining. "I've never felt so happy." "Well, that was a pretty special adventure," Elizabeth admitted. She smiled at her friend as the waitress brought Mary and Leela's 3 scoop specials. "And Mary's getting happier all the time," Jessica continued, delighted to be proving her point. "Her mom just got married again, and they're all living happily ever after. Aren't you, Mary?" Mary stared at her ice cream without touching it. "Sure," she said quickly. "We're really happy." "If your stepfather's so wonderful," Leela asked, "how come I haven't gotten to meet him?" Leela never wasted any time being tactful. "What does he do anyway?" Leela's face took on a suspicious look. "He works on houses." "My father owns 3 houses." Bragging was one of the things Leela Fowler did best. "He also owns a condominium and an apartment building." "Well, Tim works on houses and apartments and skyscrapers too," Mary said, looking flustered. "He's a sort of architect." "I knew it." Jessica looked delighted. "You see, Lizzie? It must be great to have a dad that builds office buildings and skyscrapers." "My mom would never choose anybody ordinary," Mary insisted again, her voice firm. She paused, staring into Leela's dark eyes. "Tim is very, very special." "My father is sending me to Europe next summer," Leela said, daring Mary to top her. Mary looked uncomfortable. She saw Jessica and Elizabeth watching her. Oh, Tim says Europe is boring, she announced. He says Africa makes a better vacation. Her eyes shone, and a big, broad smile covered her face. Just before he moved to Sweet Valley, Tim designed a palace for an African king. Wow, Jessica exclaimed. A palace. She looked at Mary with admiration. I guess you must be the happiest person in the world, Mary. You've got just about everything anyone could ask for. Except good grades, Mary admitted, frowning. My report card looks like a national disaster area. 2 of my teachers call our house Friday. They want my parents to come in for a conference. But, Mary, said Elizabeth, you've always done so well in school. Well, I haven't had much time for homework lately. It just seems like there's always so much else to do. I know exactly what you mean, Jessica told her. When you have to choose between fun and work, you'd be crazy to choose work. No offense, Lizzie. Elizabeth laughed. Jessica never did see the point of spending time on homework when she could be cheerleading or talking with her friends. But Elizabeth didn't ever feel comfortable until her nightly assignments were completed. That's okay, she said. I don't mind being the bookworm in our family. Still, she appeared concerned as she turned back to Mary. I can't understand why you're having problems doing your work. We used to go all sorts of places together. Lately, though, we've hardly seen you at all. Yeah, added Jessica. Mom asked us about you the other day. She said she hasn't seen you since your mother's wedding. Mary shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I just don't have much time anymore. You see, my stepfather always wants to go places with Mom. With Mom and me, so I like to stick around. She looked at Jessica's expectant face. You wouldn't want me to miss something exciting, would you? Like what? Well, Mary closed her eyes. It was hard to tell what she was thinking. Then she looked straight at Jessica with a big, bright smile. Like a big dinner out. Tim always wants 3 of us to go out to dinner. That's nothing, Leela countered. My dad and I eat out more than we eat in. Or shopping, Mary added quickly. Tim loves to take us shopping and buy me presents. He does? Jessica loved her own father very much, but the idea of a dad who came home every day itching to buy his family presents sounded absolutely terrific. Sure. He's bought me so much stuff I can barely fit it all into my room. Mary was wearing a great big smile and looking just like a fairy tale princess, but Elizabeth couldn't help thinking that it sounded too good to be true. Wow! Jessica was thrilled and dying to hear more. I guess with a stepfather that rich, you won't be staying much longer in that little house your mother rented, huh? No. Mary dipped her spoon slowly into the mound of whipped cream on top of her ice cream. Of course not. Tim says we're moving to a much bigger house. Sure. And how many servants are you going to have? Leela challenged. Well, not any right away. Mary took a bite of the strawberry scoop on her special. It won't be for quite a while because Tim is just designing the house now. Naturally, he wants everything just the way Mom and I want it. He's very picky. You mean you get to help plan your own house? Now Leela sounded just the tiniest bit jealous. Gee, Daddy always moves into houses that are already built. He says it saves time. Not Tim, Mary told her. He likes to take charge of everything himself. Oh, great, Jessica cried. You should ask for big French doors for your bedroom with a formal rose garden right outside. And a tennis court, she added. Well, I don't know. Mary stopped eating. I haven't really thought about it. Haven't thought about it? Mary, what is the matter with you? Jessica rolled her blue-green eyes. I can see you need someone to help you with this project. How about if I help plan your room? I don't think. First, we'll have a big dressing room off the bathroom, Jessica said. The pool should be right off the rose garden. We'll make it just like the one in Dream Chaser. Oh, no, Elizabeth interrupted, exasperated. Whose house is this anyway, Jess? Don't you think we should let Mary's stepdad build his own home? And how about a long terrace with a sweeping view of the 9-hole golf course? Leela suggested. Mary looked alarmed. Leela, I really don't think my house is going to be that special. But Jessica and Leela were too carried away to pay any attention. You'll definitely need a guest cottage, Jessica declared. Yes, agreed Leela, with its own pool, something small yet tasteful, full of class. Speaking of class, Elizabeth said to Mary, Glad to change the subject. Are you going to take the jewelry making classes Mr. Sweeney and Miss Lacey are giving on Wednesdays? Even though they had very different interests, the twins had signed up for the after school jewelry workshop. Leela was also planning to take the course, but Elizabeth hadn't seen Mary's name on the list posted in the main hall. Miss Lacey says we're going to start out with silver bracelets. Gee, I'd really like to, said Mary, but I have to get right home after school. Mary, you've just got to come. All the unicorns have signed up. Oh, we were hoping you would come, said Leela. We're going to make official club bracelets. Mary, Jessica, and Leela were all members of the Unicorn Club. Elizabeth thought most of the girls in the club were snobs and that the only purpose to their meetings was to talk about boys and clothing. But Jessica loved being a unicorn more than anything else in the world. The unicorns were all pretty and popular. They did everything and went everywhere together, and they always wore a lot of purple. Purple was the Unicorn Club color. But Mary hadn't been to meetings in quite a while, so she didn't know anything about the club's plans. That's great, Leela, but I still can't come. Jessica couldn't imagine anyone turning down the chance to make their own jewelry. You don't have to make the same thing as everyone else, Mary, she explained. Mr. Sweeney told our art class that you can do anything you want. I'm going to make my bracelet look like two roses twined together. I already did a drawing in class. You can't have that much homework, Leela insisted. I can't come, Mary told her, looking very uncomfortable again. I know just about everybody in school has signed up, and it does sound like fun, but I have to get home right after school now. It's the only time I have with Mom all to myself. If I spent it making jewelry or doing homework, things would never be like they were before. What do you mean, like they were before? Elizabeth asked gently. Oh, you know, before I got a stepfather and Mom got a new husband. It used to be special, just the two of us, just Mom and me. For an instant, Mary's eyes misted over, but then her face broke into a wide grin. Not that things aren't great now, she insisted. It's just that I have to give up some things because we're so busy. She set her chin firmly and looked at her three friends with determination. But I'm not going to give up my mom. So that's why you haven't been able to type those articles for us. Until Mary's stepfather had moved in, Elizabeth, who organized the Sweet Valley Sixers, the sixth grade class paper, had been able to count on her friend to help with the typing. Lately, though, Mary always seemed to have an excuse when Elizabeth asked her for help. And that's why you haven't been coming to the Dairy Burger with the unicorns? Jessica asked in surprise. I've missed being with you, Mary admitted, but I just can't give up my mom. Things are different now. I hope you understand. She looked at her watch and struggled quickly with her sweater. Gee, I didn't realize it was so late. I've got to get home. Mom and Tim said they were driving up the coast, but they're probably back by now. Jessica looked down at Mary's bowl. But you've hardly touched your ice cream. You eat it for me, Jessica. Mary was already headed for the door. I want to tell Mom all about the movie. See you tomorrow. Boy, Mary sure has changed lately, observed Jessica as she watched their friend race off. Yes, Leela agreed. She's turned into a regular hermit. Elizabeth frowned. She missed spending long Sixers work sessions with Mary, the two of them typing and laughing for hours on end. The only thing is, hermits usually want to be alone, she told Leela and Jessica, but I don't really think Mary wants to choose between her family and us. She looked up as Mary slipped out the door. I wonder why she thinks she has to. Chapter 2. Jessica and Elizabeth entered the Wakefield home through the sunny, Spanish-tiled kitchen. In his usual position by the open refrigerator, the twins' brother Stephen was assembling the ingredients for one of his enormous sandwiches. Hey, guys, he greeted them as he pulled a head of lettuce from the crisper. Guess which mature, sophisticated freshman has been picked to be chairman of the entertainment committee for the next Sweet Valley High dance? Stephen's eyes were twinkling with excitement. Today is Sunday, dummy, Jessica reminded him. How could you get picked on the weekend? Well, he admitted, the election really isn't until tomorrow. But I talked to Kathy Connors, and she says she's sure everyone's going to want me to be chairman.
The whole committee was crazy about my idea of making the dance theme Dream Chaser. I want to get a DJ to play all the songs from the movie and have all the girls dressed like Leslie Morgan.
Ugh, Jessica looked disgusted. I didn't like her clothes at all. She paused, remembering the movie. Of course, a room full of Tom Houstons would be wonderful. Your idea is only half bad.
Thanks a lot, Stephen told her sarcastically. Now, if you two will excuse me, I have some serious work to do.
He carried his plate into the family room where he could watch a football game while he ate his colossal sandwich. The twins followed Stephen and found Mr. and Mrs. Wakefield already watching the game in the next room. Eyeing Stephen's sandwich warily, Mrs. Wakefield commented, "I certainly hope that Leaning Tower of Turkey is more stable than it looks."
"It's ham," Stephen corrected, "and it's built to last."
"Sure," Elizabeth giggled, "about as long as anything edible lasts near you. 2 seconds.
"You know," said Mr. Wakefield, his brown eyes shining, "I think Stephen holds the all-county title in munching out." "Hey," Stephen protested, laughing with the rest. "What do you mean, all-county? I defy anyone in the state to make a better sandwich."
Mrs. Wakefield rolled her eyes and turned to the twins. "How was the movie, you two?" Jessica sank to the floor with a dreamy expression. "Tom Houston is the ultimate."
"I suppose that means he's good," her mother guessed.
"Good? He's perfection. He's super. He's someone who could use a better movie," Elizabeth finished for her. "Mom, you should have seen how silly the script was. Women threw themselves at him every second, and he never made a single mistake. I mean, you'd think he was playing Superman instead of a race car driver. He didn't even come close to losing a race in the whole movie." "Why should he?" Jessica challenged. "He's not supposed to be an ordinary human anyway. He's... She sighed and waved her hands in the air helplessly. "He's Tom Houston."
"Well, nobody asked me," their father announced, "but I think I agree with Elizabeth. I like to watch stories with which I can identify, and I'm afraid I've made too many mistakes and lost too many battles to identify with perfection."
"Besides," Elizabeth added thoughtfully, "I'll bet perfection can be pretty hard to live with." She remembered the discussion at Casey's after the movie. "According to Mary, it's nearly impossible." Her mother looked concerned. "Elizabeth, what do you mean? I thought everything was going well for the Wallaces." "For the Wallaces, but maybe not for Mary." Elizabeth remembered how sad Mary's face was when she described her perfect stepfather.
"Oh, I'm sure Mr. Wallace will be adopting Mary as soon as it's legally possible," said Mrs. Wakefield. "Then they'll all have the same name." "Yes," Mr. Wakefield agreed. "These things take time, but as soon as they've located Mary's real father and made the proper application, they can all become Wallaces."
"That would be great," said Jessica. "After all, Mary can't miss her real father very much. He and her mother got divorced when she was just a tiny kid." "Yes," admitted Elizabeth, "but don't forget that Mary just found her mother and her real name. I'm not sure she's ready to give all of it up for anyone else." "That's silly, Liz," Jessica assured her. "Why, with the spectacular house her stepfather is building, everything will be perfect."
"The Wallaces are moving?" asked Mrs. Wakefield.
She had a part-time job as an interior designer and was always interested in finding new clients.
"Maybe Andrea would like some help planning her new home."
"Oh, don't worry about that, Mom," said Jessica. "I've already given her lots of good advice." "I don't think a new house is going to make much difference to Mary," Elizabeth insisted. "There's something really bothering her, Mom. I've asked her over here at least a dozen times in the past month, but she always says no. She never goes anywhere anymore." "Not even to unicorn meetings," Jessica added. "We've been operating without our treasurer for weeks now."
"From what I hear," Steve teased, "you don't have much use for a treasurer anyway. I mean, any club that holds all its meetings at the Dairy Burger has got to be broke."
"For your information, Stephen, Sweet Valley High isn't the only group that can sponsor a dance," Jessica declared. "It just so happens the unicorns are planning a big party with a band and everything." "A band?" Elizabeth sounded surprised. "Do you know how much that will cost?" "Isn't it fabulous?" Jessica smiled smugly at her twin. "I bet you wish you'd join the unicorns after all." "And spend my life painting my fingernails purple and gossiping about everyone in school? No thanks." Elizabeth had gone to one unicorn meeting at the beginning of the year. For her, one was enough. She decided that the unicorns did nothing but dream up new clothing fads and laugh at girls who didn't follow them. In fact, Jessica and Mary were just about the only two club members Elizabeth respected. Maybe Mary's just decided she's had enough of the unicorns. No, Jessica insisted. Mary really loves the club. She's always had lots of fun at meetings, and she comes up with the best fundraising ideas. Or at least she used to, she corrected herself. She used to do a lot of things, including spend time visiting her friends. Elizabeth was getting more and more upset, remembering Mary's big, phony smile that afternoon. It's true, I haven't seen Mary for weeks, Mrs. Wakefield said. I wonder where she's been keeping herself. She just stays home with her mother, said Elizabeth. She's afraid to let her out of her sight. Elizabeth felt her voice catch a little. Meanwhile, I feel like I'm losing a friend. I haven't talked to her mother in a few weeks. Maybe I'll give her a call and see how things are going. Elizabeth felt much better. Mrs. Wakefield had a knack for fixing things. She had been the one who helped Mary's mother find a job so she could stay in Sweet Valley. Gee, thanks, Mom. It just seems like Mary's problems are bigger than she can handle. Well, Jessica observed, if having a stepfather who's going to build her a mansion with a pool and tennis court is a problem, I wish I had some problems of my own. Elizabeth remembered the way her twin had taken charge of Mary's future home. Jessica, you were so busy building that house yourself, you didn't let Mary get a word in edgewise. Well, somebody had to get excited about it, didn't they? All you and Mary wanted to do was sit around and mope about her grades. Grades? Is Mary having trouble in school, too? Mrs. Wakefield asked, looking concerned. Elizabeth hadn't wanted to mention how badly Mary was doing in school, but now that Jessica had let it slip, it seemed important to explain things. You know how terrific Mary's grades have always been, Mom. I just know something is bothering her. I mean, if her new stepfather is so wonderful and everything is going so well, why is Mary afraid to leave her mother's side, even to do homework? I'm not sure, Elizabeth. Mrs. Wakefield exchanged glances with her husband. But I'm going to try to find out. Chapter 3. Hi, Mom. Has the carpet come yet? Mary rushed into the living room of the small, cozy house Mrs. Robinson had rented when she got a job in Sweet Valley. It was Monday, and Mary's classmates were eating lunch in the school cafeteria, but she'd remembered that her mother had taken off work today. Mary was sure she would have her mom all to herself without her stepfather around. She stopped short when she saw the slender, bearded man in the kitchen. Hello, Tim, she said slowly. What are you doing here? Tim Wallace smiled and joined them in the living room. I live here, remember? Mary remembered all right. She also remembered what it had been like before her stepfather moved in. After years of hoping, after nights filled with tears and prayers, she had found her mother at last. At last she didn't need to be jealous of her friends. She no longer looked at their mothers, wishing she was their little girl, too. She had a real mother of her very own. For a short time, anyway. She watched her new stepfather circle her mother's waist with his broad arm. She watched him pull her close to him, and worst of all, she watched her mother smile up at him, looking as though he was everything she needed. Maybe he was. Maybe they didn't need her at all. Maybe she was just in the way. I thought Tim was working on a house today, Mary whispered to her mother. I thought you were going to be home alone, Mom. Mrs. Wallace hugged her daughter. I thought so too, honey, but it seems I've got two terrific friends who decided to visit me while I wait for our new dining room carpet. She smiled again at Tim, who now put his arm around Mary too. But Mary stepped away, ducking from under his hand. She didn't feel like being part of a threesome. Actually, I just came back for a minute, Tim explained, stopping to retrieve a battered guitar case from under the couch. I wanted to tell your mom about my big purchase. Mrs. Robinson smiled with enthusiasm. Oh, yes, Mary. Wait till you hear what Tim bought this morning. She led Mary to the couch and sat down beside her. Come on, Tim. Sing her the song you wrote about our new boat. Tim sat down on the other side of Mary, his old guitar in his lap. Mary looked at them in disbelief. Our new what? She asked. Tim smiled at her, but Mary was sure it was only to please her mother. You've just become part owner of a magnificent ocean-going vessel, young lady.
He winked at Mary, but her expression made it clear she wasn't at all interested in what he had to say. And, he continued, in honor of this occasion, I've just composed a suitable song. Mary had heard enough of her new stepfather's songs, especially the sticky, sweet love songs he was always singing to her mom. Every time Tim took out his guitar, Mary's mother looked at him with a shy, loving smile that made Mary feel more left out than ever. It's true, Mary's mother told her. Tim actually bought a boat for us today, and you'll never guess what kind. She looked as proud and happy as Mary had ever seen her. It's a tugboat. You know how Tim's been working on refinishing a kitchen for that family over on Bellevue Drive? Well, it turns out the father used to work at a naval shipyard. He's had this old boat for years and years. That's right, Tim said, strumming a few chords. He liked the work I did on his house so much, he said he loved to see me try my hand at restoring the tug. One look, and I fell in love with the old boat. He laughed and then began to sing a silly song called I Think I Can, about a decrepit old boat. The boat got into a race with a sleek yacht, and in the last verse chugged its way to victory. When the song was over, Mrs. Wallace clapped loudly. She thought her new husband a very talented musician. Oh, Tim, you're wonderful. Mary and I are so lucky to have you in our family. Right, Mary? Mary didn't answer. She pulled closer to her mother on the couch, holding her hand tighter than ever. Her stepfather's voice was pleasant to listen to, but his song had made her lonely and frightened. It'll take time to fix the old tug up, but it's something we could all do together. A real family project. Tim smiled hopefully. Mary felt them both looking at her. She knew they expected her to be pleased with their big surprise, but it was just one more thing she'd been left out of. They'd been talking about it, planning it together. It wasn't really hers at all, and having a tugboat was pretty embarrassing. In Sweet Valley, almost every other family owned a sailboat or a cabin cruiser. Why did her new stepfather go and buy some leaky old boat? Yep, a chance like this doesn't come along too often. Tim was beaming, his arm again around his wife. I haven't seen a tug like this since I was a kid. A tugboat? What would the girls in the Unicorn Club think? A lot of them had wealthy parents who loved expensive clothes and houses. She had already boasted to her friends about her stepfather and how he was going to change their lives. How he was going to move them out of this small house into a fancy mansion he was designing. How his architectural firm built skyscrapers and office buildings. Of course, the sanding and painting will take time, Tim continued, and it'll be hard work. Won't it be fun? A shadow crossed her mother's pretty face as she looked at Mary. It'll really be something when we've got it all fixed up. Something is right, thought Mary. Just wait until my friends find out we've got a tugboat instead of a yacht. Just wait until they find out I've got a handyman for a stepfather. She knew she should have felt guilty about saying that Tim built houses instead of fixed them, but actually it had been sort of fun to talk about a glamorous, make-believe stepfather instead of the person who was trying to take her mother away. And maybe what she'd said wasn't a lie anyway. Maybe her real father was more than an ordinary carpenter. Maybe he was like the fathers of the girls she'd met in Sweet Valley. He might be a doctor, a lawyer, a banker, anything by now. If only her parents hadn't gotten divorced when she was a baby. If only she didn't have to get used to a brand new father who just pretended to like her to please her mother. Your mother and I decided that you should name our boat, Mary. What do you think we should call her? Tim asked. But Mary couldn't stop thinking how much better things used to be. If only they had stayed the same. If only her mother were still Andrea Robinson instead of Andrea Wallace. Now she didn't even have the same name as her mother. She didn't feel like part of this new family at all. Why don't we call the dumb boat just what it is? She said angrily. Bolting from the couch, she ran upstairs toward her room. A rotten wreck, she shouted. Quickly, before they could see the tears streaming down her cheeks, Mary disappeared into her room. At first, Mary tried not to listen to the voices in the living room below, but soon, as the conversation drifted up to her, she found herself straining to catch the words. I don't know what's come over her, she heard her mother tell Tim. Her voice was tired and sad. Mary never acts like this, Tim. I just don't know what to think anymore. She's changed so much. I feel like I hardly know her. That's according to you. Tim, too, sounded tired. Ever since I've known her, though, Mary hasn't changed at all. She's still doing poorly in school, she's still angry at the world, and she still doesn't seem to like me at all. Please, Tim, be patient with her. It takes time to get used to big changes like the ones we've been through. I know the two of you will get along together if you just give her a chance. There's nothing I want more than for us to be a real family, honey, but I'm afraid you have things a little mixed up. Tim started to walk across the room. If this thing is ever going to work, it's Mary who has to give me a chance. She will. I know she will. Now Mary could hear her mother following her stepfather to the front door. She covered her ears with her pillow, but she could picture Tim kissing her mother goodbye before he hurried out the door to his next job. When she was absolutely certain that Tim had left, Mary dried her eyes and went downstairs. I'm afraid we didn't have much of a lunchtime together, sweetheart, her mother told her. We never have any time together anymore, Mary complained. Alone, I mean. We have lots of time to be mother and daughter, Mary. We've got the rest of our lives. My loving Tim doesn't change that at all. But it does, don't you see? Mary wanted to make her mother understand just how much everything had changed. At first, the idea of her mother getting married had seemed exciting. The two of them had picked out dresses for the ceremony and talked about plans for the honeymoon trip. But then her mother and Tim had left her alone with the Altmans, the foster family she'd lived with before she'd found her mother. It was only for 2 weeks, but each night she woke up tossing and crying, convinced that she'd lost her mother once more. What I do see, young lady, is that it's time for you to get back to school, and you haven't eaten a thing. Quickly, Mrs. Wallace grabbed an apple and some slices of cheese and slipped them into a plastic bag. Mary was glad that Jessica and Elizabeth had not been able to come to her mother's wedding. They had had to cancel at the last minute. At least she didn't have to introduce them to Tim. If only her mother would send him away. If only she could put everything back the way it used to be. Just the two of them. No handyman for a stepfather, no broken-down boat, no crying in bed while Tim and her mother whispered downstairs. Here, silly, her mother was saying, as she put a twist tie around the bag of fruit and cheese and handed it to Mary. Maybe you can sneak a bite or two in between classes. Mary looked sullenly at the bag. Her mother never used to forget about making her lunch. Mary dropped the bag on the counter. I'm not hungry, she said, then scooped up her books and headed for the door. I lost my appetite. She slammed the door behind her, glad that for once she'd forced her mother to think about her instead of Tim. Chapter 4. Janet Howell, the Unicorn Club president, was furious as she scanned the faces around the cafeteria table. I scheduled this meeting at lunchtime just so Mary could be here. This is the 4th meeting in a row she's missed. A bossy 8th grader, Janet wasn't used to club members skipping meetings. She liked to think that the unicorns were the most important thing in the whole middle school. In fact, in the whole world. Does anyone know where she is? Sitting at the end of the table next to Leela, Jessica raised her hand. She had seen Mary in the hall just before lunchtime. Mary went home, Jessica told Janet. She needed to talk to her mother. I'm sure it was important. Janet frowned. Well, how can we have a meeting about fundraising without our treasurer? She glanced around the table again. Everyone was still eating. At the end of the table, Leela groaned. Look, Janet, she spoke up. It's not exactly a federal offense to miss a few meetings. Leela was Janet's first cousin and one of the few unicorns who ever stood up to her. I think Mary has shown she's not ready to be a club officer, Janet replied. The way she runs this club, Leela whispered to Jessica, you'd think it was the United Nations or something. Well, all I know, Jessica whispered back, is if this meeting isn't a short one, I'm going to be in a lot more trouble than Mary. I've got math next period, and if I show up without my homework one more time, Miss Weiler is going to kill me. You are pushing Weiler to her limits, agreed Leela. Last week, when you were passing notes to Helen Bradley, she got so angry I thought her eyes were going to pop out of her head. As Jessica and Leela laughed, Janet banged her fork on a cafeteria tray as if she were a judge in a courtroom. "This meeting had better come to order," she announced, glaring at the two sixth-graders, "or we'll never find out how much money we need to raise for our big party next month." Kimberly Haver, a seventh-grader, raised her hand. "Janet," she said, "we don't need Mary to tell us we have no money left in the unicorn treasury." "That's for sure," agreed Tamara Chase, another seventh-grader. "We used all our money for those purple sweatshirts we bought for the club." "I've got a great idea," Betsy Gordon piped up, "and it won't cost us a cent. Why don't we let my brother's high school band play for our party? He says they need the practice. I bet they'd play for free." Jessica sighed loudly, and some of the other girls put their hands up to their mouths to hide their smiles. Everyone knew how horrible Johnny Gordon and the Waves sounded. "We'd be better off with no music at all," Jessica whispered to Leela. Thanks, Betsy," said Janet, "but I think we need something different for this party. My bunkmate from camp, Judy Walker, is coming to visit me, and I already told her we're sponsoring a dance. Anyway, Judy is president of a club at her school. They call themselves the Shooting Stars, and they give really terrific dances all the time." "How about a singer?" asked Leela. "We need a really dreamy singer for our party." "Yeah," Ellen Reitman, another friend of Jessica's, agreed. Her brown eyes flashed, and her voice got high and excited. "Leela's absolutely right. Why, if we had a romantic singer, we might get boys to dance more." "How about someone who knows the songs from Dream Chaser?" Jessica suggested. "That's what the high school is planning for its next dance." Jessica gave a knowing smile. The unicorns always liked to be filled in on what the older kids were doing. "That's a terrific idea, Jessica," exclaimed Kimberly. "Do you think we could give the party at your house by the pool, Leela?" Leela's pool was, without a doubt, the biggest, most luxurious swimming pool in all of Sweet Valley. "Sure," she agreed readily. "Daddy won't care." Mr. Fowler was usually so busy traveling on business that he let Leela do just about anything she wanted. "This is dreamy," Ellen declared. "I'm going to dress just like Leslie Morgan." "Well, I'm going to dress a lot better than that," Jessica assured them. "I'm going to wear my blue sundress with the beige jacket and my new unicorn bracelet. We're bound to have finished them by then." "Me too." Soon everyone was planning their outfits and discussing decorations, but Jessica had still another surprise planned. "I just might have a very special dance partner, too," she said in a mysterious voice. "Who?" "Oh, just Tom Houston, that's who." "Are you kidding, Jessica?" Ellen stopped describing Leslie Morgan's gold lame jumpsuit and stared at her friend in astonishment. "Well, I've been writing to him every week, and he's even sent me a photo." "Is this photo personally signed, just like the one you got from Johnny Buck?" Janet asked, sounding very superior. She hadn't forgotten the time Jessica boasted to everyone that the famous rock star had autographed a photo just for her. It had turned out that the picture had been signed with a rubber stamp and passed out to a concert crowd with hundreds of identical photos. "Not everyone is as caring and wonderful as Tom Houston," Jessica replied haughtily. "I'm going to write him and tell him about our club's Dream Chaser party. I'm going to ask him if he'll sing the theme song for us." "He'd never come in a million years," Betsy Gordon exclaimed, but her expression showed that she hoped he would. "Maybe not," Jessica told her coolly, "but it never hurts to try." She was sure all the unicorns, especially Janet, would be incredibly impressed if she could get Tom Houston to come to the party. Why, Janet might even put her in charge of the whole dance. "Well," concluded Kimberly, "if we're going to count on Tom Houston to entertain, we might just as well give up the idea of a party." "What?" Janet declared. "And let the unicorns be shown up by the Shooting Stars?" She wasn't about to let her friend from camp laugh at her or her club. "Let's let Jessica try." She smiled hopefully at Jessica. "I nominate Jessica Wakefield for chairman of our entertainment committee. All in favor, raise their hands." Jessica's heart started to pound as all the hands at the table went up. What would she do if Tom Houston turned her down? She smiled confidently and decided to worry about that later. "What about decorations?" she asked Janet. Janet frowned again. I don't think we have any money for decorations." She sighed.
And speaking of money, I think we better elect a replacement for Mary. In fact, I'm not so sure Mary even deserves to be a unicorn. Oh, come on, Leela whispered, just loud enough so Janet could hear her. After all, Janet went on, ignoring her cousin, if she's not responsible enough to attend meetings, why should she be in our club at all? Jessica was furious, but she didn't dare challenge Janet. Janet was too popular and important to cross. Still, it wasn't fair to push Mary out of the club when she wasn't even there to defend herself. Jessica poked Leela in the ribs. Janet's your cousin, she whispered. Do something. Oh, why not give Mary one more chance? Leela asked. After all, she did most of the work typing up the celebrity cookbooks. Janet looked around the table. It was clear that most of the girls agreed with Leela. All right, she conceded. We'll continue this meeting after school at the Dairy Burger, but if Mary's not there, she's out of the club. She tapped her pencil impatiently on the tray. This meeting of the unicorns is now adjourned. As the club members were getting up from the table and piling up their empty trays, Jessica looked toward the other end of the wide, windowed cafeteria. Thank goodness, Elizabeth was still there. She raced over to tell her twin about Janet's ultimatum. Elizabeth and three of her friends, Amy Sutton, Julie Porter, and Sophia Rizzo, were planning the next issue of the Sweet Valley Sixers. Munching on the last bites of their sandwiches, they reviewed the latest student council news, discussed the poetry column, and wondered how they were possibly going to get everything into print before next week. The four girls stopped talking when they saw the expression on Jessica's face. What's wrong, Jess? Asked Elizabeth. Jessica poured out the story of the unicorn meeting. Even though Elizabeth didn't have much use for the unicorns, Jessica was sure she understood how much the club meant to Mary. We've got to talk to her before the end of school today, she explained. If we don't get her to that meeting at the Dairy Burger this afternoon, Mary will be out of the club. Jessica shuddered, thinking about it. She'll be a total reject. Speaking for all us non-unicorns, Julie Porter replied, I think things could be worse, Jessica. Oh, sure, Jessica said apologetically, but not for someone like Mary. She likes to be popular and have fun and do neat stuff. I think you just made us feel worse, commented Amy. Sophia smiled. She understood best of all what Jessica was trying to say. Before Elizabeth had befriended her, Sophia had known just what it was like to feel left out. I think Jessica's right, she said. Mary needs the unicorns just like we need each other. How can Janet be so ridiculous? Elizabeth said. It sounds so unfair. Well, you know how bossy Janet can be, said Jessica. Does anyone know what classes Mary has this afternoon? Asked Julie. Sure, said Jessica. Elizabeth and I have history class, and there's a 7th grade science section right across the hall. I always wave to Mary during class. Okay, Jess, I guess we're the ones to tell Mary. A frown knit Elizabeth's brow. But you know how she is lately. She'll probably want to rush right home. Not this time. Not if I tell her she's going to be kicked out of the unicorns, said Jessica. I guess you're right, Elizabeth agreed. She stood up to take her tray to the front of the room. The rest of you keep an eye out for her, too. Mary's had enough changes in her life lately. She sure doesn't need to become an ex-unicorn. Chapter 5. Jessica and Elizabeth were relieved when they saw Mary walk out of the room across the hall from history class. Elizabeth winked at her twin as Jessica got up from her seat and scooped up her books. And just where do you think you are going, Miss Wakefield? Mr. Neidig asked sarcastically as Jessica headed for the door. But the bell rang, Mr. Neidig. Jessica looked around, embarrassed to see that the rest of the class was still seated. Isn't class over? You're right on one account, Mr. Neidig smiled as Jessica sank back into her seat. The bell has rung, but I'm afraid your teacher hasn't quite finished talking. He rubbed his chin, then ran one hand through his gray hair. Now, let's see, where was I? Jessica felt desperate. Mr. Neidig almost never kept his students after the bell. Why did he have to turn into a carrot chatterbox today of all days? Oh, yes, I was going over your assignment for tomorrow. The real builder of the Roman Empire was Augustus. Would he ever stop talking? Jessica turned in her seat and caught Elizabeth's eye.
She pointed out the door to where they could both see Mary. She had stopped to talk to a girl in the hallway just outside Mr. Nidecks' room. Jessica waved and tried to signal to her, but Mary didn't see. So I want you to list as many of Augustus's accomplishments as you can, but I'd like you to write a detailed paragraph on your favorite one. Mr. Nidick watched Jessica waving and frowned. Would you like to invite your friend in for a refresher course, Miss Wakefield? Blushing crimson, Jessica stopped signaling Mary and shook her head. With the whole class watching, she sighed quietly and faced the front of the room. All right, then. I'm not asking for a polished essay, just your thoughts on one of the great Augustan triumphs. Again he stared at Jessica. Is that clear? Oh, yes, sir. Jessica sat up straight, looking bright and eager. When Mr. Nidick dismissed the class, Jessica darted into the hall and looked left and right. She caught sight of her tall, blonde friend leaving the building. Mary, Mary, she shouted, and hurried after her, clutching her books in one hand and waving frantically with the other. Wait up! But Mary didn't look back. Just as she ran through the front doors, Jessica collided with Bruce Patman and Rick Hunter, two seventh-graders who were standing at the top of the steps with their arms full of oak tag posters. The three of them and a pile of books and cardboard ended up in confused heaps all over the stairs. Hey, what's the hurry? The two boys stood up and helped Jessica to her feet. Next time you decide to rush a guy, give him some warning, will you? Bruce Patman smiled at Jessica. Jessica thought Bruce was the most gorgeous boy in the whole middle school. Sorry, she said. I was so anxious to get to our unicorn meeting, I wasn't watching where I was going. Rick was the seventh grade class president, and though much quieter than Bruce, he was just as cute. Are you all right? He asked, looking a little worried. Sure, Jessica assured him, delighted to be talking to the two most popular boys in the school. Gee, she said, turning her brightest smile on them, I guess you never saw anyone so clumsy. Well, Bruce replied quickly, if that accident was just a trick to get us to ask you to help us with these posters, it worked. Yeah, added Rick, stooping to retrieve the big cardboard sheets that lay scattered around them. We could use some help. Mr. Sweeney wants us to hang them all over. I'd like to, Jessica replied, but I really have to get to a meeting. She looked worriedly toward the path where she'd seen Mary just a minute before. She wasn't anywhere in sight. Well, if we don't want a lot of kids showing up at the wrong jewelry classes, I guess we better get started, Rick said to Bruce. The two boys started back toward the building. What do you mean? Jessica asked, chasing after them. What are those posters? Sign-up sheets, Bruce told her. The jewelry class next week is so crowded they had to add extra sections. Jessica lowered her eyelashes. Are you taking the class, Bruce? I sure am. My mom's birthday is coming up, and I thought maybe I could make something for her. That's so thoughtful, Jessica cooed. What are you making her? I thought a silver charm for a necklace might be neat, Bruce suggested. What a fabulous idea! I love charms. Maybe I could help. Great. Let's make sure to sign up for the same class. I was going to make a big silver letter P. What do you think? I think you had better stop gabbing, Jessica, or we'll miss the unicorn meeting, Leela Fowler interjected, coming up to them. Did you forget about it? Leela's father didn't get along with Bruce's father, so Leela thought a lot less of Bruce than Jessica did. Come on, let's get going. Okay, Jessica agreed, waving at Bruce and heading down the steps with her friend. I already told Bruce and Rick I couldn't help. Rick Hunter? Leela stopped at the bottom step and turned to see Rick stapling a poster onto a bulletin board. Why didn't you say so? Leela didn't think much of Bruce, but Rick Hunter was an entirely different matter. The shy, popular boy had a way with everybody, and besides being handsome, he was one of the best tennis players in the school. Leela loved tennis, and she liked flirting, too. Leela quickly headed back up the steps to join Rick and Bruce. Jessica followed frantically behind her. Oh, wait a minute, Leela. We don't have time for that now. We have to find Mary and tell her about the meeting. Don't be such a party pooper, Leela scolded. The meeting's not until 3:30. We've got plenty of time. Her long brown ponytail swished from side to side as she strode up the stairs. Oh, Rick, do you need help? While Leela held posters, Rick stapled them. Jessica knew that her friend expected Bruce and her to form another team. Still, she couldn't help thinking about poor Mary. After a few minutes, she tapped Leila's shoulder and told her she wanted to speak to her alone. "You can stay if you want to," she said, when they'd walked around the corner from the boys, "but I have to go look for Mary." "Don't you dare leave me alone," Leila's brown eyes blazed. "That would make everything look too obvious. Jessica Wakefield, if you walk away now, I'll never speak to you again." Even though Leila was her best friend, Jessica knew that she could carry grudges forever. She also knew better than to cross Leila when she was determined. So the four of them worked together for half an hour, replacing all the old sign-up sheets with the new posters. Stapling the last board in place, Rick announced, "I guess that does it." He smiled easily and effortlessly, the way he did at everyone, but Leila seemed to think it was just for her. "Thanks a lot. If there's anything we can do in return, just let us know." "There is," Leila told him, giving Jessica a knowing glance. "Walk us to the Dairy Burger. You could probably use a Sunday after all that work." Jessica was practically floating by the time they approached the Dairy Burger. She couldn't wait to see the unicorns' faces when she and Leila walked in with the two most popular boys in school. But as they entered the popular after-school hangout, Bruce asked a question that brought Jessica quickly down to earth. "So, what's this special emergency session all about anyway?" he said. Jessica stopped short just inside the door. Oh no, Mary! Because of Leila, they'd never gotten the chance to catch up with Mary. Now, if her friend didn't come to the meeting, she'd be out of the unicorns. And it would be all my fault, Jessica thought. Frantic, she surveyed the crowded room. She saw Ellen Reitman sitting at a table with Kimberly Haver and Tamara Chase. She saw Janet and two of her 8th grade friends at the table across from them, but she didn't see Mary anywhere. Just then, Bruce spotted some friends across the room. "Okay, girls," he said, "see you two later." Before Rick could say a word, Bruce had grabbed him by the elbow and led him toward his friends, leaving Leila and Jessica alone at the door. What a mess! They hadn't found Mary, and Bruce and Rick had walked off so quickly that none of the unicorns had seen them together. Jessica followed Leila dejectedly toward Ellen's table, but then the door opened behind them, and a familiar voice stopped Jessica in her tracks. "Jessica, Leila, wait up!" Mary, panting, rushed up to her friends. Her face looked anxious and worried. "Has the meeting started yet?" Jessica sighed with relief. "Boy, am I glad to see you. How did you find out about the meeting?" "Elizabeth stopped me on the way home and told me all about Janet. Thanks for spreading the word, Jessica." Jessica never let an opportunity pass to take credit for something. "No problem. What are friends for?" she said breezily, then steered Mary to the 2 tables where the others sat. "Look who's here," she announced cheerfully. "Mary, are we glad to see you," Kimberly told her. "We thought you'd forgotten all about us," added Ellen. "Of course I haven't," Mary told them. "It's just that I've been really busy." She helped Jessica and Leila bring up extra chairs, and the 3 girls squeezed in to form a tight circle around one of the unicorn tables. "So what have you been up to?" asked Ellen. "We haven't seen you in ages." "She's been having an incredible time," Jessica answered excitedly. "Her stepfather is handsome and rich, and he's building them a brand new house." Mary felt embarrassed. Maybe she'd been carrying her boasting too far. "We're not moving yet, Jessica," she cautioned, "but we have been keeping pretty busy. Tim has all kinds of new projects. Today we bought a boat." "A boat?" Kimberly exclaimed. "That's fabulous. Is it a yacht?" Kind of. I mean, it might not be that big. I haven't even seen it yet." "Can we all go for a ride?" Jessica could picture herself on board a luxurious yacht, her hair streaming in the wind. "Gee, I guess so." Mary was glad her friends still wanted to be with her, but how would they feel if they knew Tim was only a carpenter? What if they found out her yacht was really a tugboat? She wasn't at all sure they would feel the same way about her if she told them the truth. She wasn't sure about anything anymore. "Attention, everyone!" Janet banged on a table with her spoon. "I think everyone knows why I've called this special meeting," she said, glancing at Mary. "I hope that we can finally have a treasurer's report." Mary stood up quickly. "I'm afraid I really can't be of much help, Janet," she announced. "If we're going to hire a band with the money in our treasury, we're going to have to find one that will work for $3.10. The girls at both tables looked dejected. That won't even pay for decorations, said Jessica. I'm sorry, but we spent just about everything on our club sweatshirts. Are you absolutely sure that's all the money we have? Asked Janet. I mean, you have been away a lot lately, Mary. Maybe there's something you left out. I'm sure, Mary replied. I double-checked the figures. And that's not all the bad news, Leela added. I called home after lunch today. The housekeeper says Daddy's put the pool off limits until the filter's fixed. Oh, no, Ellen cried. You mean we can't have the party at your house? Leela nodded sadly. Oh, Mary, I just wish your stepfather would hurry up and finish your new house, said Kimberly. It would be perfect. Mary looked embarrassed. I'm afraid it won't be ready for a long time, she insisted. I told you how picky Tim is. It's going to be terrific, Jessica told the unicorns. It's going to have a swimming pool and tennis courts and maybe not all that terrific, interrupted Mary quickly. It's just a new house. It wasn't exactly a lie, she told herself. After all, Tim did keep talking about buying the house they were renting and adding on a couple of rooms. It'll be just like new, he was always saying. Well, what about a fundraiser? Janet suggested. Do you think we could raise enough by next month, Mary? Maybe. We'd have to work really hard, though. If not, we couldn't possibly. A shocked expression passed over Mary's face, and she stopped talking. She stared at the entrance to the Dairy Burger. Oh, no, she gasped. The other girls looked up to see Mary's mother and a thin, bearded man walk through the door. Smiling when they spotted Mary and the unicorns, Mrs. Wallace and Tim walked straight to the tables where the girls were gathered. Hello, darling. Mary's mother was beaming with pleasure. What a nice surprise! What are you doing here? Mary wanted to sink into the floor. She wanted to go to sleep and not wake up for a million years. I was just going to ask you the same thing, she told her mother, wishing that Elizabeth hadn't found her and that she'd missed the club meeting after all. As Jessica and the other girls gathered around to meet her new stepfather, Mary wished she'd never joined the unicorns at all. Chapter 6. Mary stared at her mother and stepfather in disbelief. How could they have appeared in the Dairy Burger, of all places? I thought you were going out to dinner, she told them. We were, Tim explained, but we hadn't driven 2 miles before your mother got a craving for a chocolate shake. He winked at the girls clustered eagerly around them. So here we are. Sorry if we crashed your party. It's not a party, Mr. Wallace, Jessica told him. It's a unicorn meeting. What? Tim looked confused. I'll explain everything on the way. Mary was already on her feet, easing away from the table. As long as you're here, we may as well all go out and eat together. All right, honey, her mother agreed. Let me just order our shakes and we'll take them with us. She turned toward the counter at the back of the room. Why don't you introduce your friends to Tim? I'll be right back. Now Mary looked plainly miserable. Tim, she said, in a voice that was barely audible, these are my friends, Jessica, Leela, Ellen, and Tamara. She gulped as she saw Janet and the other unicorns approach her table. They're all members of our club. She remained standing, but her stepfather pulled up a chair and joined the group at the table. Hello, girls, he said agreeably. I'm glad to meet some of Mary's friends. Oh, Mr. Wallace, Jessica told him. We've heard all about the exciting work you do. She smiled charmingly. I'd love to hear about your latest skyscraper. Tim looked confused. I'm not sure what you mean, Jessica. The last job I had was in an apartment house, but I wouldn't call it a skyscraper. Mary felt dizzy and faint and thought her whole world was about to collapse around her. Have you named your new boat yet? Ellen asked eagerly. How many people does it sleep? Now Mary's stepfather laughed. Well, the sleeping quarters aren't exactly luxurious, but it looks as if she had a working crew of about 6. A crew? Tamara was impressed. Your boat must be the biggest one in Sweet Valley. Can you tell us all about the summer palace? Tamara piped in, eyes shining with admiration. Oh, Mary suddenly doubled up and collapsed into a chair. She looked very pale and held her stomach. Oh. Mrs. Wallace was at her daughter's side in an instant. Mary, what's wrong? She cried. Mary was pale and trembling as she struggled to her feet. I feel awful, she told her mother, really sick. Tim looked at his wife, then stood up. I think we better get you home right away, young lady, he told Mary. Jessica, Leela, all of you, it was nice to meet you, and I hope you'll come visit us soon.
We'd love to, Jessica replied enthusiastically. We haven't visited Mary in ages. Not, she realized, since Tim had appeared on the scene. I hope you feel better, Mary. Holding tight to her mother's arm, Mary looked terribly frightened and unhappy. I'll be okay, she said, just as soon as I get home and into bed. She smiled weakly up at her mother and clutched herself still tighter. As the three of them left the dairy burger, Tim reached out to pat Mary's back, but she shook off his hand and shrank still closer to her mother. Mary felt better as soon as they were safely in the car, but Mrs. Wallace was too worried about her daughter to go straight home without a stop at their family's doctor. Tim drove the car past the turnoff for their house and took them to Dr. Costa's office. What are we doing here? Mary asked. She had been almost lulled to sleep as she lay against her mother's shoulder and was surprised to see the doctor's familiar parking lot. I don't want to take any chances with my only daughter, Mrs. Wallace laughed. You've been acting strange lately anyway. I think it's time for a checkup. It didn't take Dr. Costa long to determine that Mary was as healthy as could be. In just a few minutes, she was sent outside to the waiting room while the doctor, her mother, and stepfather had a discussion. But she couldn't resist trying to listen to the words that drifted from the doctor's office. It's not easy, she heard Dr. Costa say, to deal with as many life changes as Mary has had to confront recently. Have there been any other problems? Mary couldn't hear everything they said, but she heard enough to convince her that her mother and Tim were telling the doctor the same things they'd said to each other that afternoon. Mary heard her mother mention the two teachers who called to schedule a conference about her poor grades, and she heard Tim describe the way she constantly rejected his affection and how discouraged he had become. I don't have any magic formula for you, Dr. Costa said a few minutes later, but I can tell you one thing. That child needs to feel she counts in this new family of yours. She needs to be reassured that no one's taken her place. I've been seeing Mary since she first moved in with her foster family, he continued. The Altmans are fine people, but for Mary there was only one person who mattered in her life, her mother. You can't expect that to change overnight, Tim. You have to let Mary find out for herself that there's enough room in her heart for you, too. Mary thought it strange to hear Dr. Costa talking about her being able to accept Tim, when all along she'd been worrying about Tim accepting her. Maybe things were partly her fault. Maybe Tim really did care about her. The phone was ringing when the three arrived home. It was Jessica, calling to find out how Mary was feeling. Anxious to make sure her mother and Tim didn't hear the conversation, Mary took the call on the upstairs phone. That gave her mother and Tim a chance to have a conversation that Mary didn't overhear. If she had, she might have felt better about her stepfather's feelings toward her. You know, honey, Tim said to his wife when Mary was safely upstairs, I think the doctor's right. Mary is afraid I'll take you away from her. That's why she doesn't like us being alone together and why she won't leave your side. There must be some way we can make her feel needed and special, Tim. I know that's all she wants. What about her birthday? Tim said softly. That's coming up in a few weeks. Maybe we could give a big party. You know, invite all our friends and show her how important she is to us. Oh, Tim, that's perfect, Mrs. Wallace declared. And I've got a better idea still, Tim said proudly. While you were getting our shakes at the Dairy Burger, Mary's friends were pumping me for information about our new boat. It seems Mary's already told them all about the tug. He shook his head. Boy, from her reaction earlier today, I never would have guessed she was so proud of it. Anyway, why don't we have the party on the boat? Great. Mrs. Wallace's eyes were shining with enthusiasm. We can fix up the boat secretly in the next few weeks. I'll put up lots of decorations. Oh, Tim shall be thrilled. But when Mary walked into the living room from upstairs, she didn't look thrilled at all. What are you two whispering about? She asked sourly. Once again, it seemed as if the two of them were leaving her out of things. Oh, nothing at all, her mother sang out, squeezing Tim's hand happily. Just a minute ago, when she was sick, her mother had been cuddling her, Mary thought. Now she was paying attention only to Tim.
Don't you have homework, honey? Mrs. Wallace said, winking at Tim. Not really, Mary said grumpily. She wasn't going to leave them alone again, to whisper and plan things without her. Besides, I fell sick again. Her mother reached over to feel Mary's forehead. She stroked her daughter's hair and pulled her against her. Smiling, Mary watched Tim get up from the couch and go upstairs. Oh, my head, she moaned into her mother's shoulder, snuggling closer. I thought it was your stomach that was bothering you before. It was, but now my head hurts too. Mary felt safe and warm, cradled in her mother's arm. It would be perfect just to stay there, cozy and content. Even if she never did homework for the rest of her life, even if she failed every course and lost all of her friends, it would be better than losing her mother again. Tim came downstairs, his arms loaded with Mary's schoolbooks. Here you go, he said, handing her the textbooks and her spiral paths. I thought maybe as long as you weren't feeling well, you and your mother could work on your homework together right here on the couch. Tim smiled kindly, then left the room. Well, Mary admitted, looking cautiously at her mother, maybe I do have a little homework I could do. Okay, Mrs. Wallace told Mary, tucking an afghan around Mary's legs. Why don't I make us some tea and we'll start working? Mary sank back into the plump sofa cushions, the fuzzy blanket snug around her. For a sick girl with tons of homework, she felt pretty wonderful.